Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of the TMC Water Cooler. As always, I have with me my co-host Hendrik,
Hello.
and our guest host today is the much lauded, very handsome man, Scott Manley.
Hello, it's Scott Manley here. That's because I have no other branding. That is my only branding I have.
But it works. It's just simple.
It is.
It's so simple, it just works. All right. So Scott, as we usually do with our guests, we ask them what games they've been playing lately. And if anyone hasn't followed your channel, they should because it's a good channel full of really cool space games for space nerds, and really cool stuff that you do on that channel with like space related math and stuff. So what games have you been playing as of late?
I've been playing Elite Dangerous, which has just entered premium beta and has had a whole bunch of new people in the universe. We've had, obviously, Arena Commander, Star Citizen, having a lot of stuff to say about that, let's say. And after that, I actually started playing Freelancer just again in the last, 24 hours more or less, because I wanted to kind of compare it since it was the last project that Chris Roberts worked on.
And how are you finding Chris Roberts' most recent project versus his most previous one?
Well, it's very clear from the way it's designed that it's designed for simplicity and ease of access. It's all mouse control. There's no hot ass setup to with expensive joysticks. It's a pretty much point and shoot mouse. Very accessible, very easy to play. Definitely shows its age, but I think that actually says a lot about why Star Citizen Arena Commander is the way it is.
And you said in one of your videos that, and also earlier, that you didn't really enjoy the control scheme for the Arena Commander. What specifically is?
There are a lot of issues that I've specifically. I mean, and I will, I gotta obviously say, yes, this is an alpha. But, to be fair, Elite was an alpha and it came out extremely highly polished. On the other hand, Elite was perhaps an aberration since there's been plenty of alphas by games like Pulsar, which were just utterly terrible when they first appeared. So, I think that very specifically, it had great support for gamepads, it had pretty good support for mouse, and then the joystick support was really, really terrible. They had giant dead zones with it. There's apparently, Control F would give you some better control if you press that, but it wasn't documented anywhere like that. And then there was the fact that to access the full, strafing commands, basically translation controls, you need to switch control modes. You couldn't access strafe commands while you were in regular coupled mode. You had to turn that off, access those, turn them back. So at no point was it possible to have a full 6 degrees of freedom control. And it really looked pretty terrible when you compared it to the likes of even Freespace 2, which is a 15-year-old game now, which had that capability.
Yeah, especially since a lot of joysticks have the hat buttons specifically for that, right?
Yeah, very big problem. That you had a joystick with this big hat, right? And it was completely unassigned. If you wanted those controls, you had to take your hand off the throttle and move it over to the keyboard, right? So you've got this expensive throttle component, completely useless because you need to take your hand off and use the keyboard to get all the control.
See, that's for me. That's part of the reason why I never really wanted to use those joysticks. Like I understood that they were cool and all, and I used to have like a really dingy. I don't remember what it was. It was like, Logitech type thing. Like, just had the button for your thumb and the trigger, and that was it. And I played like F-22 Raptor back in the 90s or late 90s with that. And as I got older, I stuck with mouse and keyboard because it was more native and
You only
felt
really
more
need
natural.
you only really need a hat setup if you're doing a game that has a 6 degrees of freedom setup, right? Because like with F-22 Raptor and other flight sims, you can't stop in midair and strafe left or right, right? You have to but for Descent or the X series or pretty much like most space sims, um, it's it's pretty important to have that strafing option, and it's kind of baffling that Star Citizen doesn't. So, what have you been playing, Hendrik?
I have also been playing Elite Dangerous. I've actually gotten more into that more recently. Picked up BF4 again the past day or two. The string of patches that have come out in the past couple months have really cleaned it up, so I've been playing that a lot. And Civ 5, basically. Just that and Eve.
Eve!
What about you?
Oh, man.
Eve is a good game.
Eve is a good game that I've become extremely good at not playing and still making tons of cash at it.
Yeah, I think that's like the end state for most people in Eve is they make a ton of money without actually playing the game.
Yeah, I mean, you don't have to play Eve to play Eve.
That is the beauty of it, and I do like to log in and shoot things, but actually working to play the game has disappeared as being a requirement anymore.
I have gotten really happy with what we're doing in Snigwaka or Waffles, because basically we're on deployment down in Providence, and there's just lots of stuff going on down there. We're heading over to Catch to shoot Brave Newbies and Hero Coalition. We can go shoot N3 every once in a while. We have Losec right next door, and we have Providence to shoot, and that's fun. I like being in the thick of like people to shoot. Basically the year before I was in Waffles, I didn't really have much to do, and I got kind of bored, and I didn't really ever log in. Now I'm like logging in like for at least 2 or 3 hours a day. And
so what is the situation in Providence? Are there still plenty of NRDS corporations at this particular moment?
I believe there are. I haven't really seen them because I don't think they're undocking because they don't want to shoot us. Because like they're just like, we're just gonna dock. They're gonna have to do something. They're gonna we'll make them do the timers or whatever, and that's, we don't want to do that anyway. So because soft grinding is so terrible. Going down to Catch, you can get lots of good fights out of Hero Coalition. So that's been a good little stomping ground, and they just took all of Catch recently.
Oh, all of Catch! Wow, I have not been paying attention to this. Brave newbies no longer newbies, but they're still brave.
No, they are still brave. And yeah, Junting was on last episode, and she talked about how they're going to be done in 2 weeks, and they got it done in a week. So
good on them, ahead of schedule. That's more than most corporations can say.
That's more than most companies can say.
Well, yeah, I mean, obviously, with Arena Commander being the hottest topic of the week right
now. So what about you, Tag? What have you been playing?
So I have been playing War Thunder some more, doing some good old tank action. I really like the tank action in War Thunder. It's a lot of fun. We'll probably talk more about that in the future. I picked up Planetary Annihilation again since I added Galactic War, and I've been enjoying that quite a lot. It's pretty interesting to see how the path that you take through the galaxy and fighting the different battles influences future battles. Like right now, I have so you get technology every time you complete a star system, every time you beat somebody, right? And I have two. One of the technologies you can get is you can get sub-commanders, which are basically just AI commanders that help you out. And I have 2 of them, and I don't even have to play the game. Like, I can just turn on the Galactic War and then watch my little AI do its thing and win against the one AI commander that I have to fight, and I just like sit back and recline and watch all the explosions, and it's really fun.
So it's like single-player EVE Online then, right? You don't have to play it.
Absolutely. And that's going to be really interesting in the future because Mavor was talking about how he wants to move Galactic War into a multiplayer arena where they have, he specifically mentioned clan wars. This is a year ago, so I don't know if things have changed, but when I was talking to him, he was talking about how like clans could create private galactic war scenarios for them to fight other clans in as like a little competitive like scrimmage kind of thing. And then they might run a like ultra huge galactic war map that people can pick a side and play on kind of thing. it's a really flexible system, and right now it's just basically the single-player proc-gen campaign for Planetary Annihilation. But PA has come a really long way in the year or so since I last played it, and I've been enjoying it quite a lot. And then
I need to re-download that game, to be honest, because I only played about 40 minutes of it.
Yeah, it's a very easy game to understand. Is the nice thing about it is like everything's just kind of like you got metal, you got energy, and you produce units. It's a lot simpler and a lot less micro focused than games like StarCraft, which also means that it's really easy to just sit back and like send in an army and then watch the army just wreak devastation across a huge area. It's pretty cool. And then finally, I've been playing I Divine Cybermancy because that game is a treasure. Have
I keep buying it on Steam to give to people, and I own it, but I've never played it beyond.
I've never heard of this game. What is?
So I'll explain this because I Divine Cybermancy is a fever. It's like imagine somebody who has 105-degree fever. So they're having like awful fever dreams, and their fever dreams are about Warhammer 40k and William Gibson's Neuromancer, and then gather like a bunch more of those kind of people, put them in a game studio, make them French, and make them try
a Half-Life mod. Basically, it's a Source game basically on an old engine.
It's more than a Half-Life mod, though.
I mean, point is, it has very similar. It has the same look and textures and physics and everything. But it just has such a range of I don't know, mechanics in it. You have the guns, you have the abilities, the psionic. I can't remember.
And they interact in just bizarre ways. And
is it a good game or is it just like really bad, but it's so bad it's good?
All of the above. Like there are a lot of parts about it that are genuinely bad. The hacking in particular is just terrible. But there's also a lot about it that's genuinely good. Like it incorporates a persistence element to it, where you make a character and you level them up and stuff. But even more than that, you have like a base and you do research and you buy new gear and stuff, a la XCOM, and you learn new abilities and buy implants and psionic abilities, and there's side quests but it's where Deus Ex kind of had like a structure that you could follow and a general feel that was cohesive. So it felt, instead of feeling like one just chaotic battleground, it felt like a world that occasionally got into violence. I Divine Cybermancy is just crazy all the time. The only time that you ever really have this sit around the game is when you're at your home base. So even when the game is like encouraging you to do side quests and try out alternative stuff, it's just hurling enemies at you and like forcing you into all sorts of different situations. So I Divine Cybermancy is a gloriously weird maximalist game where there's just fucking everything. It hurls everything at you, and that's why it's really good. It's somebody trying to make Deus Ex and then taking every element of Deus Ex and cranking it up to the most extreme level possible, and then filter it through a terrible translation and a story that is like metaphysical and deals with like time loops and just all sorts of it is a very hard game to comprehend. But
this sounds like someone was on really good drugs when he was like in the pitch meeting, and everyone's like, "Yes, that's what we want."
It's more that the team seems to just like have these ideas, and then they just let the one guy run off and do it. Like one of the teams like, "Oh, wouldn't it be great if we do this?" And off he goes, does it, integrates it into the game, and the other guys are like, "What the hell did you do?" Like they didn't plan it. It just is epic.
Yeah, that's a really good explanation. It feels organic. It feels like an organic game. Like they didn't have any sort of specific design idea in mind. They just made a game, and then here it is in all of its bizarre, incomprehensible glory.
It feels like you know how you would get like Skyrim and just add mods to it? It kind of feels like that. Like a lot of different mods thrown together. They don't necessarily all fit together, but it can make for a fascinating experience.
It is. But it's good. I like it quite a lot. So, let's stop talking about I Divine Cybermancy and go back to the more important topic, which is Star Citizen and Elite Dangerous and space sims in general, which are seeing a big resurgence. So, Scott, if you want to talk a little more about Arena Commander and what's going on there.
Well, so the fascinating thing I've noticed in the last week is, I was posting Elite Dangerous videos, covering all the ships and everything, and getting a great response. Day the Arena Commander comes out, I do a quick review, and I'm kind of like, the graphics are nice, controls kind of need a lot of work, and immediately I start getting like hate posts on all the Elite videos, basically saying, Elite is absolutely terrible, it's clearly going to fail, it does all these terrible... And here's the thing, people that are spending all this money supporting Star Citizen, I think it is actually creating like a toxic environment where people feel compelled to support their chosen backer. And it's completely pointless because you can be on both sides. There's no sides. If both games are great, we all win, right?
What was funny was PC Gamer did a roundup on, I think, Friday, where it's basically their highs and lows, which is a weekly op-ed that they do. And one of the writers put Star Citizen's Arena Commander as a low, and he was like, well, it's because from what I've seen, from what I've heard, having not played it, it just seems like it's not delivering on some stuff. And, he basically listed some reasons. And then the entire comment section of just that one article was just people hating on that one guy and that one, like, a paragraph and a half comment on Arena Commander and Star Citizen possibly not being that good. And I was just like, man, this is what we want? Like, to me, I don't like that, because it's this negativity. And having been on the Star Citizen forums, I've seen it firsthand, and they're very toxic in some regards, and they're very, how dare you talk about this other game? It's beneath us. And it's kind of funny.
Oh god, yeah. How dare Star Citizen support, the gamepad and the mouse better than joysticks? We want DCS spaceship, right? That's what I was paying for. That's why I have $5,000 in this, and I've spent this money. Therefore, I have this right to be, upset, and it is something that I'm sure the devs are having a hard time dealing with.
I feel bad for the community management team because they would have to deal with that toxic behavior, and they have to deal with the fact that people from who are doing that like toxic activity, like harassing others on other sites or in comment sections, for like your videos or whatever, they more or less are supposed to represent the people that CIG want to make a game for.
Right, those are the ambassadors, right? The people that are out there, they want them saying, they want them to be a positive effect in the world, but they're just...
Yeah. Like, yeah. I voiced my own concerns with Star Citizen in the sense that, like, I didn't like what CIG was doing. I'm not a big fan of all this, like, the next generation, the next great starship, the wingman's hangar stuff. In some other decisions, I was like, oh, let's just take my money out. And I've gotten people trolling me and stuff, but I mean, I know how to handle it. But like, if I'm, some just random guy who goes, this isn't a good game, I don't like it, and I get hazed for it, and then, from a community that likes to pretend that they're not toxic, because I've seen it said on their forums, like, oh, we're not a toxic community. Who's really toxic community? EVE community.
Oh,
but,
yeah.
Them
goons.
Yeah, that too. That was always funny.
Yeah. But I mean, let's talk about what it does do well, right? And what it does do well is it does have fabulously realized models, right? It does have, wonderful tiny little details in there. The damage modeling is great. It is damage modeling I think I've seen on any game. I love the fact that you can be on the tail of one of those scythes and firing your Gatling guns into it, watch it disintegrate, and then in slow motion you see the blade wing come off and slice through your cockpit and kill you. That is great!
Yeah. It looks beautiful, and that's the one thing that the game has going for it right now, is it looks very nice.
All of Chris Roberts' games, they've all really tried to make the presentation above all else. It's never been about Sims. And I think a lot of people forget how simplistic Wing Commander was compared to other spaceship games of the time. What it had was really good presentation.
A lot of people quote off Privateer as being one of those games that's like a space sim, a seminal space sim, but compare it to like Elite and it just kind of falls apart, right? Like Elite looks worse but plays better, and that's kind of I haven't played Elite Dangerous, but that's kind of how I figure Star Citizen and Elite Dangerous's relationship is going to end up being, just because it's Chris Roberts versus David Braben again, right? Like it's
and the other thing I commented on was the two levels that we have in Star Citizen are both full of magnificent sci-fi tropes. Have the planet getting terraformed with the giant lasers burning into the crust and creating storms on the surface, and wreckage and asteroids, and just huge amount of sci-fi baggage in there that looks wonderful. You have the dead sun, or the dying sun with the flares and stuff coming off it. Elite Dangerous has maybe rings, and it has a station, and it has some planets. They're all procedurally generated. Much more realistic, although even then the realism is goes only so far. But it's clear that Star Citizen is trying to go for, all those cool ideas you've heard about in Star Trek or read in sci-fi novels, and trying to give them a place in a game universe.
Yeah, the tropes it's kind of, I would say an annoyance, but it's not like a bad annoyance, or, a big annoyance. It's more like, it would have been nicer, but whatever.
You would have preferred a more realistic universe?
Yeah. I was messing around in Elite Dangerous, and someone on the stream, because I was live streaming it on TMC's Twitch channel, had said like, "Hey, you should go in the rings of that Saturn-like planet." I was like, "Okay, yeah, I'll try it." And I, go into the rings, and I was in like frame shift or whatever the Super Cruise mode is, and I immediately exited, and I'm just surrounded by all these asteroids. I'm like, oh dear.
That looks fabulous, and especially if you're playing the the resource extraction zone scenarios, it can be really good dogfighting around those, especially when you're like trying to shoot the guy and you hit the asteroid and there's a cloud of debris comes off, and you think you're missing the asteroid, but the cloud of debris obscures the fact that you hit the side of the asteroid and spin out of control. It's that's actually probably the least realistic, but it looks so good that I'll give them that. Rings don't have nearly that level of large bodies in them, but still, it looks great.
It does, and I think that's one of the things that Elite does really well, is it makes things look good, and it makes it fun to play around with. From what I've seen of Star Citizen, and from what I've heard, visually, it looks beautiful. Doing things in the game kind of is where it falls apart a bit. From what I remember, the UI is like really clunky. The whole process of getting from Arena Commander, or from your hangar into the Arena Commander, I think is just kind of silly. Because you have to put on a helmet, then you have to go to your ship that you want to fly. You have to get into the ship, and then you have to access the menu rather than just,
It's all about immersion. I mean, if I was playing Freelancer and there's all these unskippable video sequences, you land on a planet, you have to watch the docking, the landing, this is where you are scene. It's like 30 seconds that you can't skip, as far as I can tell.
It's those things that I don't like out of like a video game. I'd rather get to the fun part rather than spend 20 minutes preparation. And I know I'm saying that as an Eve player, where there's a lot of preparation for a lot of the fun that goes in.
Yeah, I have to say.
But so let's say it this way. How about each person can only have one thing that does that, I would take Eve's because Eve has a higher payoff for me in the end.
Well, I do like being part of Goonswarm because it pretty much means we can log into the, whatever staging system we're at. I can pull a ship out of contracts. I don't need to care about it. I'll pay the premium. Bang, I'm there, Yeah, someone else is making a profit off of my laziness. And that's the way it should work.
That's capitalism.
Yes.
That's capitalism 101.
So kind of to make a difference there, Star Citizen, the way that you're describing it, it's not so much functional preparation as like visual or presentation preparation, where it's sort of visually preparing you for getting into the ship and like making sure like what you're in and being visually aware of the insides and outsides of your ship. Whereas, like, when you look at Eve, all the preparation there is functional preparation, right? Like, you're finding fits, you're figuring out what skills you need, you're figuring out, like, how fleet boosters work, that kind of thing. Whereas, like, Eve doesn't really have any of the, I mean, kind of does with the walking in station, quote unquote, but it doesn't really have any of that sort of visual preparation that it sounds like Star Citizen does.
I mean, you could
it's all functional preparation.
Yeah, you could walk slowly down the gangway towards your spaceship and then hit the get in spaceship button if you wanted. But nobody does that. They just hit the undock button on the UI.
Yeah, exactly. And so this is actually kind of really interesting because you mentioned Freelancer having those 30-second unskippable cutscenes, which are very frustrating and annoying.
They're nice the first time you see them.
Oh yeah, like it's very impressive, but it should be something that, much like walking in stations in Eve, something that you can turn off, right? But it more ties into, I remember reading an article on the history of Freelancer and how Microsoft, like Chris Roberts, was taking so long in making Freelancer that Microsoft stepped in and said, we're going to ship this game out as soon as we can. And basically took over Digital Anvil.
Yeah, they bought the company and Chris left. And then
and Chris left, and then they put a bunch of designers into the game, and I think that's probably where they got a lot of the like mouse control and a lot of the better interface stuff in Freelancer. Is just kind of like Chris Roberts, I feel, is a high concept, visually oriented kind of person. Just by how he talks and the interviews that he's given and so on. He doesn't really think about how stuff interacts, how it connects together. And so, like, with Freelancer, Microsoft had to step in and basically clean up after him.
Well, his scope is so huge, and this is what he's getting. Same thing's happening in Star Citizen. He wants everything in there because everybody's asked, will it have feature X, Y, Z? And he's like, that sounds like a great idea, let's have it, And yes, that is, we all want all these features. Can we afford the time and the budget to have all these features? Well, somebody needs to manage that, and I don't think Chris is the one managing that ultimately. I think, I'm sure there'll be somebody that will have to make some hard decisions as to what gets cut.
I think right now, in terms of budget, Star Citizen's pretty close to some other games like Call of Duty Modern Warfare 2, I believe it is on par with or thereabouts in terms of how much money it has raised for development or has sunk into development, quote unquote. Now, how much actually is being spent out of that $46 million for Star Citizen's actual development versus, say, marketing or whatever is, that's a question mark. But from what I remember reading on like a Wikipedia list or something like that for most expensive games to develop, Star Citizen's starting to get there. Like once it breaks 50 million, it's going to be on par with like LA Noire in terms of just development cost.
Right. I mean, that had a big publicity campaign. Star Citizen hasn't needed that level of publicity expense. And of course, we've got to talk about Grand Theft Auto and that's scope of things. That's up at 265 million, including the ad campaign. But it made that back, and it made like $1 billion in 3 days. So it clearly for the right project, it works. And since these guys have the money up front, they should just keep spending money developing the cool features until they run out. I guess I don't know how you manage a project like that, to be honest.
I'm starting to get the worry that a lot of people are starting to realize that maybe CIG doesn't really know how to handle how much money they were given already. You know what I mean? Because there's like lots of concerns about feature creep and stuff and the continued stretch goals. Obviously, they want to make more money so they can develop the game they want, but I don't think the management of CIG the management of CIG didn't really expect to have $46 million 2 years after they started a Kickstarter for only $2 million.
Right. Well, they had planned on like 22 million, including outside investors.
Yeah, and they're now double that.
And they're now double that. They're 45 million, yeah, so they're well over. They're getting over double that. But I mean, looking at the recent stretch goals, none of these are things that are really costing development time. They're like towels and artifacts and engine tuning kits. I guess there's one where they're saying their current one is pick the next ship that you want to have a commercial for. That's going to maybe soak up, $50,000 worth of the budget at most. I can't imagine spending more than that.
If it cost them $50,000, that'd be really expensive YouTube
That would
video.
be a really, yeah. I'll do them a commercial. I'll lend my voice to that. I want the Retaliator because I got one of those.
I think it's especially interesting because, like, if you look at the feature stuff, they basically haven't had a actual genuine feature in their stretch goals since like 10 million. It's all been just kind of like fluff nonsense, and yeah, and it just seems like instead of trying to do a stretch goal at every million, just say like, okay, if we get 5 million or whatever, we'll do procedurally generated single-player galaxies or something, rather than trying to do it at every million, and then just, it kind of dilutes the impact when every million, it's like, we will add trains to Earth. It's like, really? Because I always remember that whenever I think about like the dumb stretch goals. It's like, we're going to add a transit system to Earth. It's like, I'm playing a space game. I don't care. I want to fly around in a spaceship. I don't care about trains, unless it's literally a space train where it has space tracks, and then it goes from one space train station to the other next space train station. I don't care about trains. I care about spaceships. So,
if they're gonna put trains in the game, it better be Ticket to Ride style, like train building. I want that.
It better be
space trains.
It better be trains.
I just want to clarify, are you both backers then, or have you...
I was a backer, and then I took my money out a couple months ago, but if the game ends up being good, I'll obviously, pay the 30 some odd dollars to get in, but I took like $100 out, and I'm happy.
I mean, I think I've got like $1,000 worth of ships, but there's a mix there of some of the cash came from videos that I made, and some of the cash came from LTI. What's the word?
Yeah.
Donations.
Laundering?
Yeah, great marketing.
Yeah, there was a bit of that. But
great marketing. That whole thing was interesting, too, because that was like a big scandal in some regards where people were getting scammed on like Reddit and stuff.
It wasn't that they were getting scammed. I really took issue to the fact that there was people offering free exchange and free LTI upgrades, and we're not telling anyone that, by the way, because they were an early backer, they were getting an extra $25 out of this. They would not mention it.
Yeah, and that was, and when we did the gray market piece, a lot of people like decried TMZ over it, and what was it, like 6 months later, CIG go, we're changing the policies on the backers because X, Y, and Z, and I believe they had mentioned some people, like people were being not scammed, but like dishonest with the trading system or something like that. I can't remember the exact.
There was a lot of things, and then there was that mod, the mod that was in the chat that was more or less saying that we're supposed to enforce the no trading rule, and was then privately in the same chat offering trading.
That was a big controversial thing, especially when we named them and stuff like that for the site, but. I mean,
I just wanted everything to be above board, and I would offer it through my videos, and people would come, and I would tell them, by the way, you've given me a constellation, here's your LTI constellation, there's $25 left, and a lot of them would just take an Aurora, because that was $25, and some of them were just like, okay, take $5 for yourself and give me $20 worth of skins. Cool. I'll have $5 worth of skins, and I bought a couple of ships that way. But I really I really just didn't like the dishonesty that was going on.
Yeah. So let's move on from Star Citizen, because we did spend a good portion of our time talking about it.
I just want to say, I really want it to be successful. I want it to be awesome. All right, I'm not a hater. Right? Let's be absolutely clear. I'm not a hater. I love it. I want it to be great. I want it to be perfect. I want us to all live in their nirvana.
A good number of TMC staff actually have backed the game. Matani himself, the namesake of the site, has several...
He has a Constellation and a Retaliator or something, right? So that's like $500 worth of ships.
Yeah, and some of us really are into the game, and we really want it to be good. Some of us on staff are skeptical and stuff, and, you know...
But I think everybody agrees that the forums are just a little...
insane.
You know?
They make some great gamers TXT files.
Yes.
There's some posts on there that are worth laughing at. Just in the sheer shock value of how someone could say something like that and take it and like be very serious by what they're saying.
The level of cognitive dissonance that's required to make some of these statements is like beyond my capacity of understanding.
Yeah, like comparing a ladies only group to the fucking Ku Klux Klan, like that is a very special level of dumb acidness. That forum. But to move on, let's just sort of talk about space sims in general, because we've got Freespace 2 is on Steam, is coming to Steam. Is it already out yet?
It's on Steam. It's finally released.
It's on Steam now. It's actually on sale. I don't know if it's gonna
$5.
Is it going to end its sale before the next podcast?
It ends next Friday.
Okay, so yeah, it'll be out by next Friday. So by June 13th, you can get Freespace 2 for $5 whole.
And of course, as soon as you get it, you then have to get the Freespace Open stuff and get the better graphics and everything.
Yes, and yeah.
And play Diaspora.
And play Diaspora, absolutely.
Diaspora is a lot of fun. When I first heard about it, I tried playing it. I didn't like the controls. Like a couple of months to, I think about a year later, I played it again, like more recently, and I was like, wow, this is really good.
Yeah.
Like, they fixed the controls.
I know. It really is. I mean, it's like, hey, Star Citizen, go and take some lessons from their control setup.
Honestly, I would want NBC Universal to take the Diaspora team and be like, we're just going to give you the Battlestar IP.
Yes.
Just make us a good game.
Yeah, it's rather than that terrible Battlestar Galactica online browser game.
Oh, I remember playing that.
Yeah.
I will say this, I've never played Freespace 2.
Have you played any of them? Any of the Freespace games? Did you play Freespace?
Nope.
Okay.
I played both of them. I don't play Freespace. I stopped playing Freespace 1 out because I couldn't get it to play in a window. I've previously owned these on from Good Old Games, so I have it sitting on there. But it's nice. A lot of people like having them on Steam because it keeps them all in one nice place, you know. But Good Old Games, so GOG.com, they are reintroducing their Galaxy client, so maybe the difference will be moot.
Yeah. So GOG.com, who are owned by CD Projekt Red, developers of the Witcher series and some really cool games like that are coming up, like Cyberpunk 2077, 2020, something like that. They have this awesome site that you can buy really old games on. Like, you can get Wasteland 1. Yeah, you can get like Wasteland 1, and Wasteland 1 came out in like 1980.
Yeah, some of the games
something.
come from 1980. I think that's the oldest ones on their site.
And they're all DRM free, which is even better for people who don't like DRM stuff, like having to use Uplay to play Watch Dogs. But so Galaxy is going to be their DRM free client launcher, very similar to what Steam does. But they also are making it so you don't have to constantly be online, unlike Steam.
Yeah, and you know, if the thing goes offline, then you've got all the stuff on the disc, right? But they're actually a great place to go for space sims. They not only do they have Freespace, but they also have iWar, the iWar games, which are absolutely worth playing, and they have Strike Suit Zero and various other old games. Star Control.
I believe they have the entire Wing
They
Commander
have the
series.
entire Wing Commander series and Privateer. Privateer 2 as well. You know, one of the funny things I noticed about the Wing Commander games is they have higher profile casts than the movie ever had. I always thought it was funny.
That's true. That is true. Though, I mean, Freddie Prinze Jr. at the time was kind of a notable name. He was an up-and-coming actor.
Right. But,
And
I mean, if
that movie was just
you
terrible.
look at Privateer 2, it has a whole lot of awesome people in that.
They had Mark Hamill in one of them.
Yes,
if I remember
well,
correctly.
in a bunch
And
of
Biff.
them, actually. Yeah, Mark Hamill was in Wing Commander.
And Biff from Back to the Future.
Mhm.
As his like sidekick, or he was Biff was Mad Dog, if I remember correctly. Biff was
I'm
someone.
desperately looking through good old games to find the oldest.
The oldest
game,
games
and
they
it's
have are
so
Ultima
far-
1.
No, actually, they have an older game than Ultima 1. The oldest game they have is from 1986. Ultima 1 is from 1989.
No. That's when the Ultima 1, 2, and 3 package was released. Ultima 1 was released way before
okay.
that.
Aha.
They have the original
what I like
Wasteland
is,
as well.
Yeah.
The original Wasteland, but you can get that on Steam now. But they had it first before.
And to be fair, a lot of the GOG games are much better supported than their Steam equivalents. And a great example was Fallout, which I bought on Steam, and then I had to buy it on GOG because the Steam version had all sorts of weird issues.
I have both Steam and GOG.com or GOG.com versions of the first two Fallout games and Fallout Tactics, because I'm big fans of those. The only reason I got them on GOG is because obviously the Steam support was really bad, and also Steam has a terms of service thing where they can deny you access to the game and at their leisure. And I was like, well, I really like Fallout, so I always want to keep this.
Yeah, and that's supposedly going to be GOG's big thing with Galaxy is unlike Steam, you won't have to have discrete online or offline modes. Where like if you're going offline on Steam, you have to be online and then click go offline, so it like reserves the authentication stuff. Supposedly, I mean, we haven't seen anything on the GOG Galaxy client. Hopefully, it's a good client. But supposedly, what it's going to be is just optionally sort of an automatic update service, that kind of thing. So basically, Steam, but easier for you to sort of just take stuff out of there and then put it on other computers, or just DRM free. So
you know what else is on GOG.com that I just realized? Alpha Centauri by Sid Meier's.
Another game I own.
And it's only $6. I'm actually going to buy that.
Well, that was their original price. The original thing was that every game was sold for $6, regardless.
Yeah. Well, six or I forget. There were two. They had two tiers. It was 6 or 10, I think.
Okay, I don't know when the 10 got added, but yeah.
Yeah, and then...
But they also sell more recent games, too. Like,
when they started selling more recent games, they threw that out the window. But
I think it was better for them to end up having to just sell more recent games, because they and Humble Bundle realized pretty quickly that they can't just survive off their one kind of like a little niche gimmick. They have to offer a more diverse portfolio.
That said, I would say that the majority of GOG's revenue is probably derived from the old games. Yeah, because like where else am I gonna get like I'm bringing up my account right now. Where else am I gonna get Shattered Steel or Crusader
Syndicate.
or Syndicate,
Space Quest,
Dungeon
Police
Keeper,
Quest.
Theme Hospital.
Theme Hospital was such a good game back in the day.
It's still a good game.
Leisure Suit Larry,
Total Annihilation, Empire Earth, Hostile Waters, Antius Rising, Descent. Descent was just recently added to Steam, but
Descent, which of course was what Volition did before they did Freespace.
Yes, well, kind of.
Or in the vein on sort of one of our next topics, Vampire the Masquerade Redemption is not even on Steam, but it's on GOG.
Yes.
If you've ever played that,
I have.
It's a good RPG game.
And actually, I realized the oldest game they have is Zork 1, which was actually originally released in the 70s before PCs were.
79, I think, right?
Yeah, it says 77 to 79. But yeah. Originally targeted on deck PDP 10s. There you go.
Yeah. Original release, the PDP-10 release was 77, and the first official commercial release was 1980 with Zork 1.
There you go.
And that is something
There's some
special.
old stuff.
Yeah.
So actually, moving on to our kind of talking about what I sort of mentioned with Vampire the Masquerade, CCP Games back in the news, sort of. You have Kronos release this past week, which saw some really cool new ships come in, some redesigns of stuff like the Moa, the Crow, and the Typhoon line of ships. And you also had some nice changes. We didn't get the nice industrial changes like we were hoping, but that's coming out next month. In Creus, which is one of the names for the expansions that they're starting to do. But the Mordu's Legion ships came out, and all 3 variants died in the first day.
Very good.
Pretty quickly.
I'm not surprised at all.
I mean, that's the only way you can prove that you owned one of those ships before anyone else, is by having a lost mail.
That is true. I do like what we had kind of talked about before we started recording, but we had talked about this idea of it'd be pretty cool, or at least I had mentioned it. It would be pretty cool to have a wall of fame of like this person or shame of this is the first person to die in X ship. So like this is the first person to die in a Barghest ever in EVE history.
I think that's a video I need to make.
I would totally be down for a video like that. I would love that. Just because it's something cool about the history of EVE. And Kronos has brought some pretty cool changes with it. And unfortunately, this week we also got some kind of bad news from CCP proper. They let go about 49 staff members, thereabouts, maybe 50. And amongst those were CCP Loxy, who did EVE TV work. A lot of the stuff for like streaming of FanFest, EVE Vegas, and the Alliance Tournament and New Eden Open.
And we've got an Alliance Tournament coming up, right? So we'll see how they handle that.
We have an Alliance Tournament coming up, so his departure is going to be really, really questionable on the impact it's going to have on the Alliance Tournament, because I believe it was him and CCP Bro and maybe one other CCP guy doing all that stuff. And Bro left, and Loxy just left, so... you also had CCP Eterne, who did a lot of the lore and fiction writing, and I believe he also did community management work. I remember seeing him mostly on like lore side of things, and although I'm not a big fan of the EVE lore, it's kind of a shame because he always seemed like a nice dude. And CCP Xhagen, who was actually a really big player in regards to the CSM being formed at CCP, and the fact that he'd been with the company for about 11 years, because he got his Viking sword last year at last year's FanFest, and he actually started off in customer support and ended up becoming an associate producer.
It's always sad to see people go.
Yeah, and this is about how many people now? Like 200 from CCP?
Yeah, I guess
that have been let
so.
go in the past year?
It's definitely a problem. Like, it also doesn't help that there was Guardian ran that scathing piece on the World of Darkness mismanagement, which and alleged that a member of the fiction team or something like that wrote Hilmar's apology. That's
not exactly unsurprising.
Yeah, that's pretty common. Having your official statements ghostwritten is that doesn't really matter to me. The bigger thing is just like the total mismanagement of the Atlanta studio, and then they fire everybody in Atlanta, but they don't hold any of the managers that screwed it up responsible for their actions. Basically, they punished the line worker. And then Kotaku ran a really good article actually talking about the same thing. I don't know if you guys read that one.
I don't read Kotaku, unfortunately.
I generally don't, but this is a really good article. We should probably link it in the video. But it's about why layoffs in the game industry are actually hurting the long-term viability of careers in games.
I've never viewed career in games as a long-term viable thing. Everyone I know that has been a games coder is now doing something else.
Yeah, and that's kind of what the piece is saying is like, why is it... I mean, it's rhetorically asking why is it that people aren't finding careers in games unless they're executives, and then they say, well, it's because after a certain point, like when the developer gets bought out by a publisher, they just start doing this untenable model of boom and bust, where they hire way too many people to produce one project and then fire most of them at the end of the project. And it's interesting because there are developers that generally sidestep that, like Blizzard. Generally does not lay off the majority of its staff at the end of a project.
Well, they have continuous income, right? And by that argument, CCP should have been a little more insulated against that.
Yeah, and then, but not even that, like Rockstar. Rockstar's showed pretty consistent growth in its employee count over the past few years, and any small layoffs are almost immediately mitigated.
Yeah, and Valve as well, I think.
Yeah,
Valve's
so
a great
it's
example.
Valve loses like high-profile guys, like in like upper management positions, but they're also going to like really big positions in other companies. So it's kind of understandable that they're leaving a smallish company where they may not be, in a really powerful position and going to a larger company where they have a lot of power.
the bigger thing that I think that is the problem, and something that is just completely like tie it back into the CCP is just really dumb, is we're seeing a lot of studios using developers that aren't independent, that are subsidiaries, sort of as use, abuse, and throw away, rather than like building a sustainable model for development. And a lot of those guys either quit gaming entirely because they're tired of moving around like every 6 months to 2 years to work on a new game at a different studio, or they go into independent gaming. There's actually a whole bunch of independent studios, not even counting the big ones that make a lot of money, that have just been chugging along with like 8 to 20 guys. Then they've never lost a single person, and they make enough to like for those guys to live comfortably on, kind of thing. So it's.
But you just can't make an MMO or whatever with, an indie studio simply because you need ongoing support and everything. So,
Oh, for sure. I'm not trying to imply that. I'm saying that, like,
it's not the only model, I guess, and the big model needs to be solved.
Yeah, I do like what CSM9 member and occasional TMC writer DJ Funky Bacon, or just Funky Bacon, he had written a blog post that we had put onto TMC after I think him and some of our editors talked it out, where he basically said if Eve has been footing the bill for a lot of these projects that just ended up dying, in the sense that Eve footed the bill for World of Darkness development. Eve footed the bill for the initial and, at least early to midlife development of Dust 514 before CCP are like, we're done with this, we're moving to PC. Even though, everyone in Eve had asked them to, hey, let's put this on PC first. I'm troubled I'm worried that CCP are trying to extend themselves way too far for a company of their size.
I don't know about that. I think it's more CCP is heavily mismanaged, and I think that a lot of the people that are doing the actual work at CCP, like I have the utmost respect for CCP Fozzie, for example.
Yeah, him and Rise and Soundwave.
Manifest. A lot of these guys are just on top of their game in terms of doing stuff that matters to players and improves the game. But then you just see a lot of mismanagement where like features are added and then discontinued. They talk in the Guardian piece about how World of Darkness had 3 separate alphas, like, and then was trashed three separate times. Like, that's not something that should happen in, like, that's the sort of thing that happens in a mobile space when you're doing agile development. I'm going to hazard a guess to say that CCP, I mean, they're making the move to agile with the 10 expansions a year model, but they probably don't, at the time, they weren't running an agile model. So why are they rebuilding the same game 3 times? And the only reason that you can really fit there is that they weren't planning. They weren't doing the groundwork necessary to understand the game and how to put everything together and make a interesting game. And that speaks to just complete mismanagement. And I like CCP a lot. I really hope that Project Legion and Valkyrie do well and allow them to fund other stuff outside of, or even within the EVE universe. But there is absolutely no way that somebody can look at the CCP layoffs over this past year and the failure of World of Darkness and say that CCP is a company that is properly managed, because it's not. And the fact that they're losing, they're having a huge brain drain off to Riot, and like that's a pretty significant problem. Like their employees are feeling the need to jump ship. Uh, yeah, and that's kind of the problem endemic to CCP, and why I really hope they can pull it together with their changing model, and like, you know, they just.
There's a theory that CCP should move their base of operations out of Iceland.
I agree with that, actually, because
I agree with it as well, because the cost of living in Iceland is pretty high, so it'll save them some money. Obviously, not that much, but in comparison to some other things, but it's a good step. I think possibly they would want to shut down CCP Shanghai, just because.
That seems to be a place that's cheap, though, right? It's a lot cheaper to develop in Shanghai if you're going to outsource to China.
But what I meant was, like, they don't need to have all these different offices if they're not using them. From what I understand, they have an office in New York City, but I've never heard anything come out of anyone from that office or even know who works there.
I'm pretty sure it's just there for PR.
Yeah, like, you don't really need... You could just hire a consulting firm and you're set. Which, I mean, it could be all... that could just be the case, which, cool, whatever. They just listed it for fun.
So, like, the big issue that I see with CCP, and you kind of mention it with the Iceland thing, is every person that I've heard talk about what goes on at CCP basically mentions that it's Icelandic nepotism, because it is like the second or third largest company in Iceland, and it contributes a non-trivial amount to the country's GDP. So they definitely want to have like Icelandic people working at CCP. But unfortunately, like, I remember hearing stories about how, like, one middle manager's son got a position that he was completely unqualified for because he's Icelandic and he knows somebody. And nepotism serves a purpose. It's like, if I'm going to hire somebody at TMC, right, I'm not going to just hire one of my random friends, but I will go among my friends that I know that write and write well, or like professional people, professional contacts that I have, and go look among those people first before I hit up the general all call, right? Like, it serves a purpose in small quantities, but it really seems like CCP is just padding their personnel with people that don't know what they're doing, and not even that, but aren't really learning how to do it,
Yeah, and that's, like I said, that's one thing I'm starting to get worried about, is CCP's not learning the lessons that they should have learned at this point, because they have had some similar things happen every now and then. Like you said, starting a project and then just ending it, a la Incarna in some regards. A lot of people really want walking in stations and all that stuff.
Well,
But
they want walking, but not necessarily in stations.
if they ever do the single sign-on server where I can go from my Eve character in Eve and end up as that same dude, Hendrik Taladar, in Dust, I will be happy. Or Legion, or whatever you want to call it. But it's not gonna mean anything if the game dies like a month later, or CCP closes their doors because of mismanagement.
Yeah, and it's the CCP culture from the outside looking in seems to have an endemic sickness that, I mean, maybe there's not nepotism, but I mean, we can't really know without being on the inside, right? But it definitely, all of these issues speak to a company that is not thinking things through, even more so than like not knowing what you're doing, because you can not know what you're doing and still do something good, right?
Well, I think they did that for the first 8 years or so of Eve, and then everything else started happening.
Yeah, it's when they were just focusing on Eve and building the spaceship game. They didn't really have to worry about making mistakes, because their fan base was so enamored with the idea of Eve and stuff that they stuck through it, right? But now they're reaching the point where they have to think about how their decisions impact both existing and new players, and how their decisions fit together within like the design of the game and so on. And I think that's why we're just seeing constant failures from CCP, and why like Valkyrie is their most promising project, and I think it's their most promising project because it's the first project that they've put out that is like a passion project since Eve.
And it's being developed in Newcastle in the UK.
Yeah, it's outside of Iceland, and they moved all the Iceland guys that they could that had worked on Valkyrie to Newcastle.
Yeah, and so like I really think Valkyrie is going to be an unmitigated success for CCP, and hopefully it gets them to reevaluate their corporate culture and realize that they need to sort of embrace not necessarily auteur-driven development, but thoughtful development, like making games because people want to play them, like making a game that you want to play, that you're passionate about, because ultimately a game can have flaws, like we were talking about I Divine Cybermancy earlier, to tie that back into here. I Divine Cybermancy is a game that is heavily flawed and incomprehensible, but there's a lot of love behind it. You can tell that they really wanted to make that game. And lately, CCP, it just feels like they don't want to make these games. And Valkyrie feels, yeah.
So here's a food for thought, or, you know, a thought or a topic for discussion as we end this episode. If CCP were to just get rid of Valkyrie and Legion specifically, right, and only do EVE Online, not Eve Universe, just EVE Online, and let's say this had started right before they bought White Wolf, they're like, we're not going to buy White Wolf, we're only going to focus on EVE Online, we're only going to make a PC MMO RPG, quote unquote, sandbox game. Do you think we would see a lot of the, I would say, mismanagement?
I think you'd see that, and I also think that ultimately it wouldn't be good for the company. I think the company needs to have new ideas on the horizon always.
Yeah, and it's also with CCP, the problem there is, you say before they bought White Wolf and started work on World of Darkness and all this other stuff, right?
Before they started to like go, we have all these tons of ideas, we should totally do them.
Yeah, before they did that, but they still had just like horrible mismanagement and horrible ideas. Like Dominion sovereignty is long.
Well, is Dominion sovereignty an improvement on the old tower-based Sov? I mean, I'm not sure it's worse or better, to be honest. It's different.
Yeah, and then it is different, but like it definitely no longer works now. And then you have the problems with like walking in stations, or like their game is fundamentally broken, and every time they add something, like this is the joke about CCP, right? Every time they add something, they take 2 years to fix it, right, or longer. And so I think that if they hadn't bought White Wolf and started branching out, they would actually be a much smaller company, and I think that EVE would have a much smaller subscriber base. I think that them sort of trying to push out and be successful outside of just EVE has helped them grow into a larger company. But I also think that if they want to be successful in that space, they need to fix the problems with their culture, because there's really no way to excuse laying off 200 people from a company that should have a continual income.
Yeah, and CCP is only about 500 people right now as of at the end of these layoffs. So they cut out a pretty decent portion of their staff over the past year.
Yeah, like a third, something like that. Like when your company loses a third of its staff, and almost
in layoffs, not just people leaving. It was like in total, most of it was just layoffs. It wasn't individuals. You know, like you had a couple of individuals leave here and there, but a lot of it was just announced layoffs.
A lot of that simply came down to Dust didn't perform as they expected it would. That was they had bargained on some revenue from Dust, and clearly that wasn't there. That's the only thing I can think of. I'm not sure it'd cover a third of the revenue of EVE's continual subscription, but I think they bargained on a decent amount.
Yeah, and I think the big problem there was they didn't really think Dust all the way through. And
It's very clear that they didn't think Dust all the way through, and just how you play the game. I would not be surprised that they had that same. We didn't really think it through in terms of the business end of things.
yeah, and I think that's why they're doing Project Legion. Project Legion is to Dust as like Crime Watch was to Eve, right? Like let's revisit this really old, shitty sort of series of mechanics and fix it. And I'm really hoping Project Legion does well. I thought Dust had a lot of promise that was completely thrown to the wayside by really, really poor design. But I guess we'll see, won't we?
Yep. Yeah. And it's one of those things where we have to be patient, but as an Eve player, it's the longest game I've ever played consistently in my entire life. Oh, and if you don't count like the Mario series and stuff. Or Zelda,
I think,
yeah.
What about you, Scott? Is Eve the longest game that you've ever played? Like continuously?
It's probably the one I've spent the most time on, and I've never given it up at any point. That's the thing. And obviously I don't need to because I get like so much cash and Plex. But you know, even despite that, I'm still getting in there and keeping up to date with things, and I'm reading and tracking down, and you're still running diffs against the database to see what changed and edge in the market. So I'm actively not playing the game.
So with that, Scott, thank you very much for coming by.
There's one last piece of news that's just come through that may be relevant. Apparently, Squad, the developers of Kerbal Space Program, have announced that one of their lead developers, Chad C7, he has left the team to pursue other opportunities, as they say. And that's actually a big news, because he was pretty much second most important dev, I think, for the last 2 years. So, I don't know, that's worthy of talking about. But,
so we talked about how guys were leaving to go off and do their own things, you know, the quote-unquote brain drain symptom at CCP. I don't know much about Squad's development team, so I don't really know him specifically, but if he went off to go do a different project, that'd be interesting.
It's not clear, it just says different, you know, future opportunities or whatever.
That's interesting, because when that happens, usually it's because he got a job offer, and it's just a polite way of saying, we are really sad to see him go, because he's now going to a company that can pay him more, or, you know, can do more for him out of what he personally wants.
But yeah, he's been a very important developer. He's a guy that introduced space planes, and has done a lot of graphics and a lot of core back-end stuff. So it's kind of a big piece of news. We're still waiting on the next release of the game.
How long has it been since the last one? Because the last one was the asteroid thing, right?
The asteroid redirect mission, and that was just after GDC. So it's been a couple of months.
They still don't have a set release date for the full game, right?
They still don't have a set release date. They are when it's done.
I actually really like that, and I really think that for the long-term health of gaming, we need to start moving away from having these sort of the crunch bust cycles that sort of end up in all these layoffs, right? It's with Kerbal Space Program, he's not being laid off, he's leaving of his own accord. Like, it's not, the game is still making money. They don't have any specific release date in mind, and they're still making money enough to support a bunch of developers working on the game full time. And before it was Minecraft, and before Minecraft it was other independent games like AI War, and it's definitely a model that more people need to fit to, because I don't think that AAA concrete release date, Christmas season development is working anymore in terms of like the long-term health of gaming. So, to go off on a big tangent there.
Yes, I know we were supposed to be ending the show there, but I thought this was big news that literally just came over my desk.
So, as we end this episode of the podcast, obviously, again, thank you, Scott, for coming by.
Thanks for having me.
And we can always catch you on YouTube, Twitter, What do you have like coming up that you can give us a sneak peek on, or do you have planned?
What do I have doing? Well, I think, as I said, I'm going to do a playthrough of Freelancer because honestly, people are talking about Star Citizen, and I don't think many people really know what Chris Roberts' last game was like based upon some of the things I've read. I just think it's worth looking at. More Kerbal, more Eve, just continuing to do cool things and try to do more science.
Do you still do the because I haven't seen a lot of videos because I don't get to watch YouTube much lately. Do you still do the math videos where like you explain various mathematical equations?
I only did 3 of those, but I'd like to do some more. Last I've been doing a lot of I've been trying to come up with talking at camera about science things. And last week I talked about how bananas are all radioactive clones.
I remember seeing that.
Yeah, and I'm probably going to do a bit about my record collection and talk about how vinyl recording works. You know, I can pretty much talk nerdy stuff about any random thing you name.
I will say, you mentioned the radioactive bananas, and I have like a bunch of bananas on my kitchen counter right now.
They're also clones.
I know. It's scaring me. The science. Yes. This dark, dark science. All right. Tag, thank you for stopping by as well. And we will always be doing more space news because, you know, we have Scott to run some ideas by, and obviously he can help out snickering with some stuff, and snickering can always help him out with stuff. And obviously we always do our Star Citizen, EVE Online, everything space game related here on thematani.com. So thank you very much for listening.
Fly safe.